So, Ludum Dare 51 finished up, and I finally got to see how my game ranked.
I just can't do it. I can't take this shit no more, man.
Okay, so it turns out that everyone hated it. You know, that's fine. I wasn't really expecting to do well. It was my first Ludum Dare and the first game jam I've completed, so I was kind of expecting this. To be completely honest though, I'm disappointed in the reviews for the game that I've received. It felt like a lot of people didn't really understand how the game worked. A lot of people complained about the game being too hard. I couldn't help but feel like people didn't understand where I was coming from with this one. You see, I created this game with a very specific player-based demographic in mind. It's made for gamers with a hard R, basement-dwelling neats with 12 to 16 hours of game time a day. Basically, anyone who plays as Rust or watches Asmongold on Twitch. The game contains a certain level of high-octane gameplay that a normal person won't have the capability to understand or appreciate. Okay, in all seriousness though, it was a little disappointing because I thought the game was pretty sick. Based on what people said in the reviews, I think there are a few key reasons why people did or didn't like the game. Number one, people didn't really know what to do. This is actually my fault because I didn't include the game instructions until like a week after the game jam had completed and half of the ratings were already in. I eventually added an instructions page before the game started, but I still left out a couple things, like the fact that there was a compass telling you where to go, and I forgot to mention that the shift key allows you to sprint, which makes the game a lot more manageable. Number two was that there was no sound in the game. The game's completely quiet. A few sounds would have really added a lot to the game. Number three, there weren't enough logs. I think everyone thinks of a campfire as a checkpoint, somewhere where you're safe at, like in Dark Souls. But in this game, if you stay at the same fire, you're most likely going to freeze because there just aren't enough logs around to keep the fire going. You would need to put in a log faster than every 10 seconds, and there just weren't enough logs around to stay in the same spot. And if you did manage to stay in the same spot, you wouldn't have enough logs to create a new campfire. With all that being said, I still think this game did have two big things going for it. Number one, the core gameplay loop is really good. People mentioned that once they actually figured out what to do, the stressful balancing act of jumping from fire to fire while collecting resources was very fun. Even while I was creating the game, I had a ton of fun trying to speedrun it and get the fastest possible time. Number two, the minimal art style works. The main comment that I got was people really liked the art style. It was simple and functional while staying coherent. Using actual cube meshes as particles worked well too, in my opinion. And to be fair, a solid gameplay loop and a solid art style are all you really need for a game. I think the game turned out great, all things considered, but I couldn't leave the game in the state that it was in. So I decided to keep working on it to try and finish what my original version of the game was. I popped up in Blender and created a couple environment models and then found some environmental sound effects off of a free website, and the difference is huge. Then I added a shader to transition the screen to grayscale as a way to better show the player when you're getting cold, like how Rust does it. And then I made the fire particles more reflective to better reflect embers. I realized while I was making this video that I was still using square cubes for all of the particles, but now the models had a more stylized look to them, and the cube meshes don't really fit as well as they did when everything was a simple cube. Gameplay wise, the only thing that I changed was making fires warm you up twice as fast because it was pretty annoying to have to sit by the fire doing nothing. This is what the game looks and plays like now. And that was more or less everything that I wanted to get in the game jam. Thanks for watching. Or is it the end? Now that I had completed my original idea, I still felt the desire to keep working on this game until I can turn it into something truly sick. So where do I want to go with it? Well, the original game was inspired by Raft, and in the beginning of the game you need to stay alive by collecting trash in the ocean using a hook. Especially on hardcore mode, the constant pressure provided by hunger and thirst mechanics alongside with the constant threat of the shark make the early game extremely addicting as you try to min-max every movement to maximize efficiency to survive. The way my game does this is much more simple right now. You run from fire to fire, gathering resources to survive the cold. In Raft, eventually you automate some of the survival processes by expanding your base. creating nets that catch trash, and creating farms that grow food. Once each task is automated, you have more freedom to progress the story of the game. The way I plan to automate the survival process in my game is to allow the player to craft clothing to keep them warm so they don't need to fire. I think the best example of this system is in Rust, where you can more or less walk around in the snowy regions naked during the day, but if you tried that at night, you would die very quickly. My plan is to include animal NPCs such as deer, rabbits, or moose, and you'll be able to hunt and skin them to get hide, which you'll be able to use to craft clothing. And once you have enough clothing on, you'll no longer need a fire to keep warm, except maybe during a special blizzard weather event or if you get wet. In addition to the neutral NPCs, I'm also planning on creating hostile animal NPCs, such as wolves and a bear. Hostile NPCs won't start spawning until a certain point, so the player has a chance to craft clothing and weapons. Just like how in Raft, it takes a little while for the sharks to spawn in. And that brings me to the setting of the game. It starts in a snowy pine forest, but the end zone is a green pine forest free of snow. Originally, I wanted the game to take place during the Paleolithic period in Northern Europe around 12,000 to 10,000 BC, but after skimming a few Wikipedia articles, I decided that time period would be a little bit too restrictive, mainly because metallurgy for weapons wasn't really a thing. Also, it seems like farming wasn't very widespread. The lack of technological innovations would limit how far forward you can progress through the tech tree. I decided for the late Bronze Age / early Iron Age Europe instead, or around 2000 to 1000 BC, as that gives me the option to have some form of metallurgy progression. Go from stone to copper to bronze to iron. And farming was probably around in some places, but there was still a lot of nomadic peoples, which is perfect for my game setting. Which leads me back to the actual setting of the game. You'll play as a member of a nomadic tribe who's migrating south for the winter. The story is going to start out with you getting injured somehow and being left for dead by your tribe, which is migrating to the south for the winter. The plot is essentially the same as the iconic 2002 release Ice Age, starring Ray Romano, except you play as a member of the tribe where the baby comes from. You'll wake up next to a fire with no clothes or items, and you'll have to gather resources to craft items to survive. The overarching plot of the game will be very similar to The Long Drive, where you need to gather resources in order to travel a large distance over a procedurally generated map. The game will technically be open world, but the map is going to be more like a long rectangle. Currently, the map is only a long forest with boulders interspersed, but in the future, I'll update the terrain to have a more varied height. I'm definitely going to add in rivers and lakes as well. As you move further south, the temperature will get warmer, which will cause the rivers and lakes to unfreeze, and the snow will start melting off of the ground and trees. As the world gets warmer, more wildlife will appear, including hostile mobs. But more food will be available as well, such as wild berries. Eventually, there will be no snow at all, and the game will end once you're reunited with your tribe. Although I want to extend the gameplay at some point to include city building aspects, but that's way off in the future. I'm definitely going to add multiplayer as well, in the form of a co-op story mode, and a versus mode, where you're in a square arena and you're either by yourself or on a team to try and be the last group surviving, just like the Warcraft 3 game mode. Now that I've explained where I want to take the game, I'll share the progress that I've made. So far, I've created a ton of 3D models, a number of different primitive weapons such as knives, axes, and spears, with flint and stone versions for each, along with a wooden spear and a bone knife. All of the weapons are throwable as well, just like in Rust. I've added wood cutting for axes, so logs are a lot more numerous now as long as you have an axe. And that's where I'm at for right now, but I'm adding things very quickly. If you want to follow development of the game, you can subscribe here, follow me on Twitter, or join my Discord. Links are all in the description. Steam store page is coming soon. Thanks for watching.